Gosh, for less patient. I'll get you. Thanks for. Yeah. I have to dump. All right. See, everybody can hear me? Pretty good? All right. Good evening. I hope that everybody's doing well. Those who are curious, yes, Hannah is not here. She is feeling ill, and she'll be all right. Um, well, it's just one of those natural things. So she'll get the feeling better. I'm sure she'll appreciate your prayers for having to deal with me still, but um, that's where she. Um, before we get started, we're going to cover 1 Samuel 25 tonight. Do we have any prayer requests or any updates? See, Rig, or here, go ahead. Okay. Melinda Hammond. Rig, on the paper there, we have a couple names. I can't recall off the top of my head. Can you tell me those? Right there towards the bottom, it says prayer requests, friend of Nora, and also the friend of Eddie. I know, I want you to say it because I can't remember their name. Okay. And she has cancer and is going through chemotherapy. Yep. Anything else? Yeah, the scriptures, right? They kind of ban scriptures dealing with sexuality. So passages that condemn homosexuality in their eyes can be charged as hate speech. Anything else, Miss Paulette? I saw your hand. Okay. Ronnie is still going through tests. See what surgeries. Him in your prayers. Chris, would you lead us? We got Rig. Hand your dad that paper so he has those names. And then you got Chris Grota. He's going to Canada for mission trip. And then Melinda Hammond, friend of Cindy from Beeville, and she going through treatments for. Yeah. All right, so we're in 1 Samuel chapter 25, which is getting ready to wrap up the what we'll refer to as the David and Saul narrative, where you kind of have a back and forth here, and it's interesting. Saul doesn't make an appearance in this chapter. However, I think he still has a significant part in this chapter. In chapter 25, you're going to have Samuel's death in verse number 1. And then from there, you're going to have the interaction, beginning in verse 2, going through verse 44, of David and a rich man named Nabal. I title it Samuel's Death and David's Wake-Up Call because there is a significant misstep. There's a couple missteps that David makes in this chapter, but a significant one that gets put to a stop by Nabal's wife, who would then later become David's wife, Abigail. So, when we start in chapter 25, we see in verses 1 through 13 the situation coming to a head. Nabal is described for us. He is a rich man. This all comes within the setting of Samuel dying, and so we'll say some more about that. But Nabal's a rich man, and his business involves sheep. And David is going to provide a kind gesture for Nabal, and he does so seeking to not receive compensation, but to receive reciprocal blessing. He's blessed Nabal in what he's provided, and he would like for Nabal to bless him in what he can provide for David and his men. That's going to be the big thing that kicks off this chapter. But verse number 1, I think, though very small, though the details are very small, it tells us now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they were buried, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. Then David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. I think that verse is very significant. And I say so because the passing of Samuel is the passing of a spiritual pillar in the lives of the people of Israel. It's like if Joshua died. It's like if Moses died. This is a man that has been clearly distinguished not only in character, but as well as profession and what he's able to do for the people of Israel. He was a judge, and so he was pivotal in many of the decision makings, or had played a crucial role in those. He was foundational for the spiritual health of the people of Israel in many cases, going from city to city, not only to weigh out judgments, but to provide sacrifice for them. So him passing is going to provoke reactions from people. It tells us that all of Israel mourns. I think chapter 25 is about how David reacts. Samuel would have played a significant role in David's life. We know that David, whenever he was seeking refuge from Saul, makes his way to Samuel. And Samuel, being the prophet who anointed him as king, and a prophet who evidently from that time forward provided some sort of spiritual balance to David's life and helped to weigh spiritual matters in his life, him passing is going to provoke a reaction. And that's what I think this chapter is entirely about. I think this chapter, it really is about David almost becoming like Saul. And I say that because whenever we looked at Saul and his kingship, everything was reactionary. Everything was motivated by emotion. Everything that Saul did was either influenced or led by somebody else in a stronger way than it should be. And I think that becomes a cautionary tale throughout Scripture. I think it's a cautionary tale that we need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet spiritually. We don't need to be so dependent upon someone that their passing in our life or their removal from our life sends us spiraling. But that's exactly what it seems to be is the case for David here. And so all this spiraling reaction, again, deals with I think the root is the passing of Samuel. But beneath that, maybe we would say David has yet to find his own feet spiritually, and it's all going to be revealed because of how Nabal dealt with it. So in verses 2 through 12, you have the insult. Nabal is going to insult David. David has sent his shepherds, or had sent his men, to speak with Nabal about the provision that he's provided him and to ask for provisions in return. David was tending to the needs of Nabal's shepherds. It's kind of like I took care of you, will you please take care of me? And so all of this wasn't just an empty gesture. These weren't empty words. In fact, Nabal's own shepherds are going to say in verses 15 and 16 that David and his men provided for their every need. And so that gives the idea of Nabal's shepherds actually needing some of those provisions that David's asking for, and David's men giving him. And so really this is getting a return of what has already been given. Can you give me back the things that I gave to support your men? So they speak of that. They also speak of the protection that they received from David's men. They were pillars before us by day and by night. He's a rich man. Nabal's a rich man. He has many in his flock. He has many shepherds. And him, especially not being in the midst of his shepherds, puts him in a vulnerable position to lose everything. And so David, mindful of this, protected what Nabal had. And so he gives that request that he would return to him the things which he's provided, and that is shot down. And it's shot down with this question: who is David? Who is David? That question doesn't come from a lack of knowledge. And here's how we know that. Number one, we know that Nabal knew exactly who David was, because whenever he goes into explaining why he's not going to give anything, he mentions how servants everywhere are breaking away from their masters, which would have been the likely narrative about David. David is rebelling against Saul, the king, and not only just king, but the one who's positioned him as general, the one in whose house David serves. And so you have that as just the foundational piece from the context that tells us he knows who David is. Then you could take another step back and you could look at the notoriety of David. The notoriety of David is known among the people of Israel as well as the Philistines and as well as others of the Gentiles. They know who David is because of the events that took place in the valley of Elah whenever he defeated Goliath. And so David is a very notable man. He's a successful military general, and he has an active bounty upon his head from the king. He knows exactly who David is. We also know that he knows who David is because Abigail knows who David is. Some of the shepherds are going to split off from David's men, and they are going to, at least one of them, is going to go and warn Abigail of the danger that's coming against Nabal. Because Nabal's insult leads to David breathing threats and pursuing him with hostility. That shepherd comes in and tells Abigail, and Abigail knows exactly who he is. That's why when she speaks to him, she speaks of his power. I know that you are to be king. She also speaks to his spiritual sensibilities. So David has been distinguished not only as future king of Israel, not only as a successful man by earthly measures, but a successful man by spiritual measures. He is known to be a godly man who is to receive the kingdom. And so she knows exactly who he is. David's fame is spreading, David's name is well known. And so this whole who is David has nothing to do with just not being aware of the name, not being aware of who the son of Jesse is, but not having a respect for him. That's what this is. This is a lack of respect towards David. And the way David reacts, this is where his Saul-like appearance comes up. Because David hears this. David's men come back and they relate a story to him, and he says, grab your sword. We're going. And that's exactly how Saul would react to that situation. Why? Because Saul was consumed with his own identity. Saul was consumed with pride. And so David is reacting in a very similar way. He's reacting with violence, all because he's been insulted. And that's exactly how Saul acted in another pivotal chapter of David's life, 1 Samuel 22. Whenever he arrived in Nob pursuing David, Saul was dealing with the high priest, or the priest there, and he felt as though the priest was lying to him, as though he was insulting him, because he was siding with David for kingship as opposed to Saul. And Saul had not only him killed, but all of the priests in the village of Nob killed. And so this is right in line with how would Saul handle this situation? How would Saul handle someone saying, who is Saul? That's how David's reacting here. And so, just a couple lessons from this in verses 1 through 13. That insults have a way of revealing who we are beneath the surface. And that's not because of the words themselves. It's not to say that any insult that's said concerning you or me is true. But it can certainly show itself to be true by the way we react to it. And so if we're accused of being an unwise and hot-tempered man, and we respond by getting veins in our neck and getting red in the face and speaking loudly, were they right? Yeah, they were right. And so an insult, depending on how you want to handle it, very well shows who you are. You're either that thing or you're not. Second lesson here is that spiritual victories. David had a spiritual victory in chapter 24. He showed restraint. He showed deference. He left vengeance in the hands of God. Spiritual victories like that in the cave of Adullam in chapter 24 do not negate future vulnerability. Because what is he wanting to do here? Here it is with the stranger who, yeah, he's insulting him, but he certainly hasn't thrown the spear at him 3 times and tried to stick him against the wall. He certainly hasn't made threats against David's family so that David had to hide them among the Gentiles. He hasn't done any of these things. David hasn't even talked to the man face to face, yet he showed more restraint towards somebody he knew, Saul, than he is willing at this point to show toward a man he didn't know. And so, you might have a victory spiritually over a temptation. That doesn't mean that that temptation has now been removed from your board of temptation. You don't say, okay, today I did a good job at not lying. Now I know that lying is never going to be an issue for me going forward. Or today I did a good job of not lusting after a woman or lusting after a man. That's not going to remove the temptation for those things in the future. Which means, if those temptations are still on the board, our eyes must be mindful of these things. Our minds must be disciplined. We must be looking to ourselves. You think about 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 12. If any man thinks he stands, let him take heed lest he falls. Don't think that a victory over a certain temptation takes it off the board. But also, something that I think this chapter helps to express is don't think that godly individuals are without weakness. Godly individuals certainly have weaknesses. They vary from person to person. And they might be stronger with one person as opposed to another. Don't think that the appearance of temptation is the lack of or a lack of godliness. Questions, comments there? Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, that's especially the struggle that creeps into anybody that takes some form of leadership, especially, I would say. Anybody in some form of leadership, uh, you're, because, I mean, think about it. Is your performance really graded on how people think of you? Not necessarily, but inwardly, that's what it can become. I mean, there's many a preacher that is prideful, and I would step back and I would say probably every preacher battles pride. And part of that has to come from we understand like the real evaluation of our job, or at least most of us, I would say, understand the real evaluation of our job is are we doing what God commands us to? Are we teaching the truth fully? Are we teaching the truth in love? Are we ministering to the brethren? Now, in doing all those things, you can gain all manner of reputation among men. Some people might highly revere you. Some people might just think, I don't know why this guy's even here. We need somebody else. And that's not where the value of our ministry is held, but a lot of times that's where preachers are tempted to put it because you got to deal with people on a regular basis. And I think that creeps into an eldership as well, because in eldership, you got to make unpopular decisions. Times you got to make hard decisions. At times, you're making just unfavorable decisions. And there's always the temptation for somebody in leadership to do like Saul and just crumble to the pressure of what do the people want, um, instead of keeping it, keeping your decision making and your work concentrated on, well, what does God want from me? And so, whenever your eyes start looking toward people instead of God, I think that's where temptation actually gain, or the temptation for pride actually gains a little bit stronger of a foothold in our lives. So, um, yeah, Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. It all starts with looking for value and attention in the wrong place. Anything else? 1 through 13. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think about that because you go back when David goes to Nob, he didn't have a sword. He took Goliath's sword, which was being kept there. So he was using a borrowed sword, and now he has 400 or 600 soldiers at his defense. He's 400. So yeah, that pretty well indicates how well God has been taking care of him, especially if he also had the provisions to spare that he now needs to replenish for the 600 men. He had those provisions to spare while on the run, while hiding in caves. Very well taken care of by God. All right. Verses 14 through 31. You have Abigail's intervention. She is the mediator. Abigail is told that David is going to go and kill Nabal. And so she acts very quickly. She acts decisively and humbly. She gets a large amount of provisions without consulting Nabal. And it kind of took me aback whenever I was looking at this. And I was like, that is so much food to have on it. Right? That is so much supplies. Which in of itself kind of indicates if she just had it on hand like that, it would have been nothing for Nabal to say, oh, David was kind to me and protected my men. I'll supply for his. Go get the stuff from the house. We have plenty of it. But Nabal in of himself is a prideful and foolish man. Um, Abigail doesn't follow the same line. She realizes, hey, this is a powerful man. This is a man that has God behind him. And so if he wants you dead, you'll be dead. So she goes and acts hastily. She meets David and falls down at his feet, bows to him, and so she's entreating his favor. She recognizes, you could strike me dead right here. You could do whatever you want. Instead, she's going to insist that he listens. So she speaks with him. And there's some characteristics of her speech that are significant. She takes responsibility for what's taken place. She is taking responsibility for her husband's foolish action. She says, on me alone, my Lord, be guilt. Stepping in. If you're going to be angry with anyone, don't be angry with him, be angry with me. She then appeals to David's identity and future. She says, the Lord will certainly make the Lord a sure house. God will certainly make you a sure house. Meaning, He's going to establish your kingdom, and your kingdom is going to have succession. It's not going to be like Saul, where we're passing it from people throughout the kingdom, where you're going to have Saul the Benjamite, David from Judah, and then some guy from Naphtali. You're not going to have that. It's going to be David, David's son, David's grandson, David's great-grandson, and so forth. That's what she's talking about there. And she is talking about something that becomes a reality whenever David is king and after he brings the ark back to Jerusalem, or he brings the ark to Jerusalem. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, you have one of the more significant promises of the Old Testament, which is that in David's lineage, God is going to establish an everlasting throne. and that he will always have a son who is sitting upon that throne. That brings us to a interesting point, right? Because whenever you get to the book of Jeremiah, you remember one of David's sons, we'll use that term. The Bible uses that term. One of his sons is actually one of the kings that is much further down the lineage. His name's Jeconiah. He is so wicked that God says he's going to take the throne away from him and he's not going to give it to his sons. So the everlasting throne, I mean, this is really significant stuff, because if none of Jeconiah's sons sit upon that throne, how is this an everlasting throne? How is it true that God is going to provide David with a son who is always going to be sitting upon that throne? And the answer comes down to Jesus. Jesus is the Son of David, the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, who's seated upon the throne. He is the head of the kingdom. He's the head of the church. And so Jesus is the fulfillment of a great promise. So this promise is pivotal, and it is just so important, and that's what she's appealing to. God is going to take care of you, providing the things which He's promised. He then warns him of future regret. He says, you will have no cause for grief for having shed blood without cause. If you don't go and kill Nabal, and his plan isn't just to kill Nabal. His plan is to kill Nabal and every male that belongs to Nabal, whether that be sons or that be servants. We don't know if he has any sons, but any male who has some sort of responsibility to Nabal, and David says, I'm going to kill. And she steps in and says, if you stop, you can keep yourself from creating a regretful situation. Which this would be, if he goes through with this would be the second big regretful decision of David's life. The first was going to Nob. Remember, he mourned the death of the Levites in that village. He viewed himself as responsible because of his lying, his deception toward the priest. So this is something he's learned. This is something that might get him to stop in his tracks. He's already dealing with the grief of the innocent death of over 80 men, and then the women, and the children of Nob. Now, this could be numerous lives that their blood is on his hands. And so, David, at this point, when we get next in verses 32 through 35, we're going to see his restraint. But at this point, this is what is distinguishing David from Saul. It's not spiritual weakness that Saul's spiritually weak and David's not. It's not that Saul makes mistakes and David doesn't. It's that, really, when David is confronted with sin, he's willing to listen. He's willing to act. He certainly has his weaknesses, has many a flaw. Many a flaw. But the strength that makes him very different is his willingness to be corrected. And that's so different from Saul. So some lessons here. Wisdom speaks the truth with humility. If you speak to someone harshly, but you're speaking true words, more often than not, that's counterproductive. She could have gone up to David and said, you big old idiot, what do you think you're doing? You're supposed to be king of Israel, and this is how you're going to handle small things? Is this not a small thing to you? Can you not just man up? That's how she could have handled it. But it's not. She comes to him humbly and seeks his favor through kind words. So, speaking the truth with humility is wise because more proven method. Second is that sometimes others can help us from keep us from becoming who we would later regret we've become. Basically, somebody can keep us back from a big mistake that ends up really being a watershed moment in our lives. It helps to set the balance, right? We have spiritually minded people in our lives, especially as those in the church. We have one another. One another we help bear spiritual burdens, Galatians 6, verse 2. But we still have that responsibility to take action for ourselves, Galatians 6 and verse number 5. And so there's a harmony between you need to be able to stand on your own 2 feet spiritually, but then also not always having to stand on your own 2 feet, if that makes sense. Because one of the great blessings of being a Christian is you have like-minded people who are going to help and assist you in navigating life. One of the spiritual blessings that Jesus talks about for those who forsook all and followed Him. Next, you see David's restraint whenever he's corrected. He says, "Blessed be the Lord whom sent you this day to me." And so in this, he's recognizing 2 things: God's providence and Abigail's discernment. God has been good to me. You have been wise in dealing with me. And so his recognition leads to abandoning his hostility. He listens to the correction. Again, that's the difference maker between him and Saul. So some lessons from this is that the godly are not those who do not err. Everybody will. If we say we have no sin, we lie and we deceive ourselves. 1 John 1 verse number 8. Instead, this is who the godly are. The godly are those who can see their error and turn from it. Second lesson here is that gratitude easily replaces anger when we see God's hand in the situation. If I can see that God has been taking care of me, and that God is taking care of me, and that God will take care of whatever issues lie ahead for me, it gets a lot easier for me to put my anger to bed and to live a life of gratitude. Next, you have Nabal's end in verses 36 to 38. This is when he's judged. Nabal is feasting like a king. Why? That's unclear. Is he feasting like a king because this is his habit? He can do it with regularity? Maybe, because that was a lot of food they had on hand. Is he feasting like a king because he is celebrating to some extent? I showed David to. David was afraid to come down and meet me. Look at who I must be in the eyes of men. Maybe. None of those things are clear. What is clear is he was very drunk. And so Abigail had some things to say to him, but she reserved those things for the morning, when the drunkenness is broken, and now he is sober. Again, just kind of a small display, really, of her wisdom, because if you want to get a reaction out of a drunk person, that's what you'll get. But if you want to speak something that's going to resonate, good luck. Seldom are you going to ever find a drunk person who in their drunkenness is going to be able to hold on to words of wisdom, words of correction. Seldom. More often than not, what you're going to receive is hostility or maybe just total disregard. So she waits till the morning and she informs Nabal of all of this. Part of this might be like she exposed to David, where he took the wrong step. Part of this might be, I provided for David. All of it, however, makes him die within him. He's crushed. And then he dies 10 days later. Then in verses 39 through 44, that opens up Abigail to marriage. David hears that she is a widow, and he takes her to be his wife. David is able to remarry at this point. You'll see this in verse 44, because Saul has given Michal to another man. And so David's without a wife. David's able to remarry. So he takes Abigail, which might have been a blessing to him. It might have been a blessing to the future throne that he was going to have, or that he is to have. This is where he makes another mistake. He marries Ahinoam alongside her. which makes David in this chapter, for the first time, and what we're going to see continue, a polygamist. And so David joins the ranks of many of the Old Testament polygamists. Nothing that the scriptures support. He is going to reap the hardships of this decision because all of his polygamy is going to further evolve and reap all sorts of hardship because of his sons and the loss of sons and the rebellion of sons and a number of issues. And this also, I would say, is an obvious, goes against God's ideal for marriage, Genesis 2:24, one man, one woman, one life. And it goes against expressed writings concerning kings, not to take multiple wives, Deuteronomy 17:17. So David takes potentially an answer and provision and makes a major misstep in the process. Just real brief, 3 lessons here. I think this chapter teaches that we need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet. Paul would say, Philippians 2 and verse 12, work out your own salvation, fear and trembling. We should be able to stand because we don't need somebody else to be our pillar. We should be able to stand with Christ alone, as Paul did, 1 Timothy 4 and verse 11. Second, the discipline of letting God act. We don't have to take everything into our own hands. In fact, it's better if we don't. Jesus would teach us not to. Jesus would teach us in passages like Matthew chapter 5, 38 through 42, that we don't need to retaliate. We don't need to seek revenge. If you get slapped, turn the other cheek, let them slap that. If they throw a bunch of weight on you and say, go with me a mile, you go with them too. You move forward because God's going to sort it out. You see that 2 Thessalonians 1, verses 5 and 6. And then third here, the power of wise intervention. Abigail stopped a huge event from taking place, a huge just outpouring of sin from taking place, a huge what would become a regret from taking place. And so we too ought to understand, even in whatever situation of life we are, no matter how small we might appear to the other person, we are able to step in to mediate. James 3 and verse 18 says, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Jesus would say in Matthew 5 and verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Any final questions, comments? All right, thank you. Very strict stop.
Evening. Just announcements before we start our period of worship. I'll always like to welcome our visitors, and if you are visiting, have a visitor card and fill it out in the pew. Reminder to silence all electronic devices so they don't go off or interrupt our work. As it's always announced on Sunday, that please be sure to grab a bulletin on the way out this morning. Hadn't done so. Got done so this. And or if you don't need one, there's a digital copy on the Remind app. And have a few announcements. And have our ladies Bible class luncheon next Wednesday on April the 8th. It's going to be the morning, but unfortunately gotten next week. Next Saturday, not April the 11th, we have our looking for a host to decide on a meal and games for game night. Got some prayer requests. Mary Lopez, the friend of Nora Campbell, was undergoing cancer and chemotherapy at this time, and Maria Renteria's daughter Unique, friends of Eddie Rodriguez, who is having an emergency back surgery, and Chris Grota as he's going to Canada. Going there, or is he already there? In mind, and many of y'all know her. Melinda Hammond from Adam Street Congregation in Beeville is going through cancer treatments at this time. Johnny, as he's still undergoing tests. As always, we want to remember our evangelistic efforts and missionaries in Southwest and Southeast School of Bible Study, and those from the on the bulletin prayer list, as we always want to remember those as you. That's all the announcements that I have at this. Go to our Heavenly Father in prayer as we enter our worship with me. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, we come to you in prayer. Enter into our period of worship as we sing songs of praise by Brother Stephen for the he selected this evening. He praises unto your name, and Brother Cody's he's lessons he's sent to us. Put it in our hearts and minds, and have a better understanding of that word, and meditate upon these things as we go back into the world, as we teach it to others that are lost in this world, that are in need souls to your church. I pray thee be with those that were just mentioned, that are undergoing cancer and chemotherapy at this time. I pray that you'll help them to feel. I want to thank you most earth down the cross for our sin. We oftentimes fail thee, know that we're not perfect, to make mistakes from time to time. With that, I pray that you give us. You guys can you pray.
I'd like to go ahead and mark in your psalm book song number 453. 4, 5, 3, I am resolved. Once you got that mark, go ahead and turn over to song number 405. There it is, 495. $495. We read of a place that's called heaven. It's made for the pure and the free. These truths in God's word He has given. How beautiful heaven must be. How beautiful heaven must be. Sweet home of the happy and free. Fair haven of rest for the weary. How beautiful heaven must be. In heaven no drooping nor pining, no wishing for elsewhere to be. God's light is forever there shining. How beautiful heaven must be. How beautiful heaven must be. Sweet home of the happy and free. Fair haven of rest for the weary. How beautiful heaven must be. Pure waters of life there are flowing, and all who will drink may be free. Rare jewels of splendor are glowing. How beautiful heaven must be. How beautiful heaven must be. Sweet